So I originally started using these four phrases about 10 years ago. So it was wake up, grow up, clean up, show up. And in this domain, we have a way that we can begin to understand the various areas of human growth. And so when we talk about waking up, we're really talking about this capacity for self-transcendence, this capacity to move beyond the limited or exclusive identification with Daniel or Dustin or our bodies into this more understanding ourselves as an emergent principle of reality, interconnectedness, and with a base of wholeness. We start from wholeness, and we act out our uniqueness from wholeness. That's really what this waking up dimension is about. And I want to say, just as a side note, that you mentioned this earlier, that waking up isn't just a state experience that's temporary. Waking up can be something that can be trained and stabilized as a permanent attribute of one's experience. Mm-hmm. So self-transcendence doesn't have to be just a peak, but can be something that becomes a persistent experience over time as a view or an experience of reality. So I want to emphasize that we're not just talking about one-off hits, but there's a trainable capacity of stabilization that's possible for every single human being. And that's what we mean by waking up, not just a state experience, but a continued, ongoing experience of waking up. Waking up is something that is almost like a pre-existing condition in the sense that it doesn't have to necessarily be earned over time, but it's always already the case. And so we can begin to point out and build into our language and into our education systems this principle of waking up, or this principle of undivided wholeness from the very beginning. So I'm totally in agreement with you. So if we have wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, grow up would be the second category. There are actually very clear developmental levels that we can move through as human beings. And as we move through those levels, we increase our capacity for complexity, for care, for inclusivity. And so the example I gave earlier of authority shifting from an outer authority to an inner authority is one of the ways in which we can grow up. We grow up by beginning to inner source authority rather than outsource it. There are many other models we can use, but just so you understand, that's this domain of growing up. And one of the best ways to begin to understand how we can grow up together is by simple practices of perspective taking. We can begin to understand, how many perspectives am I actually taking? Do I understand what someone else is experiencing? Do I understand what they're experiencing about someone else's experience? We can begin to fractalize our capacity for complexity. Or can I think about what I'm considering right now and then take a view on that particular view? And then can I look at the system in which that's embedded? And can I look at all the dynamics that's unfolding within that system? So there's a way in which we increase our capacity for holding more and more while including all the previous skills that we had. And we also, I mean, there's other even oversimplified but easier ways for your audience to understand is that, we move from more of an egocentric world view to an ethnocentric worldview where we just care about our tribe, to a world-centric view where we actually understand that we're all human, to maybe a cosmocentric worldview where it's even beyond. So there are ways in which we can understand nested hierarchies of growth in all kinds of different ways. So that's one example. So cleaning up is interesting. So in both waking up and growing up, things can go wrong. There are ways in which we can experience trauma, and we can experience aspects of ourselves that aren't welcome into our life circumstances or into our frontal personality that we push aside, that we push into the product. So there's a whole dimension around healing and integration that in the West, our psychotherapeutic traditions are excellent at. In indigenous cultures, there are particular medicine work that's really effective at cleaning up and integration and healing. But this whole domain is one in which, if we leave it out, we'll end up with people who maybe have some sense of awakening or some sense of being grown up, but in certain aspects they're broken and they have shadow elements or some aspects of themselves that are acting out in ways that are actually damaging. So we can do this cleanup work as groups or as individuals. And then the last broad category that would stem from an integral framework would be this category of showing up. And so not just waking up, growing up, or cleaning up, those are all important, but how does it actually show up in our lives and how do we show up in the world to actually make an impact? And if any of these dimensions are left out, then our showing up in the world is going to be a little bit, it could be a little bit kinked. It could be a little bit, it could lack flow. It could lack impact. It could actually affect people in negative ways or unintended ways. So at a minimum, waking up, growing up, and cleaning up and showing up are the four categories that we'd want to include in any sort of integrative approach to our own lives and our own development. And with that framework in place, we can work towards what Ken Wilber and I have called a deliberately developmental civilization.